Hello, Stephen Henry here. I'm going to do a pre-delivery walkthrough about the battery switch and switches on the dash and some do's and don'ts and maybe why the motor won't crank type video. So first and last thing is always turn the battery switch on. It's in this compartment here, and we'll just go ahead and turn this switch on. You turn it to the first switch, the first part that says on, that turns on one battery, and you have a second part to that turns another quarter, and that turns on both batteries. It's best to run it on both if you're surfing, using a lot of the electronics, but if you anchor and stop and hang out for a while, go ahead and flip it back to the number one battery so you're not draining on both. Some of the other things in here are some breakers. These are push button breakers to reset if something stops working. And then these down here are flip down breakers. So that flip down and back up to reset. That's the platform, so the power platform. If it quits working, if somebody holds the button down too long, it is going to trip that breaker, and you just reset it by pushing that. And you have another set of breakers under the dash for like stereo and lights and things like that. They're labeled there, and they're just push button reset breakers. So first thing and last thing you always do is turn that battery switch on and then back off again when you're finished with the boat, and that preserves the battery. It keeps you from coming back to the boat next time and having a dead battery. So the other things here is the switches. The first switch here is your navigation switch. That turns the red and green light, turns your lights on the dash, but it turns the navigation lights on up front for boating at nighttime. And that's just one touch is navigating, which turns all the lights on. If you tap it again, it turns red. That's actually an anchor position for the lighting. Don't really recommend that, because if you're out at night anchored, I would rather have all the lights on and be most visible. And that's the green position. That turns all the running lights and stern light on the boat. The next switch is court light. It's a two-way switch as well. One side of it's court light. That turns the interior lights on in the speakers and around the boat. It's kind of a nice ambiance interior lighting. And then the second side to that switch is bilge. So the next side to that turns red, and that's a bilge light that's down in the engine compartment. And then tapping it again will turn it off. The next light is docking lights. That's almost like headlights, but only for docking. You don't want to run those going down the lake at night. They'll give you a ticket, but you can turn them on when you're pulling into the dock or trailering or something at nighttime. Next switch is underwater lights. For nighttime boating, if you want to turn the underwater lights on, that's the switch to do that. This is an accessory switch and some blanks, and then you have another blank here and another accessory switch. The arch, this is an arch up and down, so this controls the arch. When you push that, you got to hold it down, and it will raise and lower the arch. So it's only one switch. You push it one time, it goes down. Let go, you push it again, it goes back up. Same switch. This switch says arch lights. This arch does not have lights on it, so that's just a dead switch. It doesn't do anything. Along with these accessory switches here and here, they won't do anything because nothing's hooked on. It just kind of fills in the space. Blower switch here. Before you crank, every time before you crank, you turn the blower on, and that's a fan or a vent in the engine compartment that ventilates the engine compartment just in case there's fuel fumes build up. So before you crank, every time before you crank, you want to turn that blower switch on. The next one is wiper. We don't have a wiper on the boat. That's maybe for larger boats, but they have that switch on there anyway. The next one is a bilge pump. So that's a pump at the lowest point underneath the motor. That's automatic, so if water comes in, it's automatically going to pump it out. but that's a manual way to turn that pump on. And then the last switch up there is the horn. So that's a quick overview of the switches and gauges and battery switch. I'll do another video on the Simrads and the surf screens. A couple things that would cause the engine not to crank is if the shifter is not in neutral. Straight up and down is in neutral, so it has to be in this position to be able to crank. And another reason is the trim. This button here is the trim that changes the angle of the outdrive. If the trim is too high, the engine will not crank. So you just simply push the trim button down to lower it. You'll hear a little faint beep that kind of lets you know, hey, I'm down far enough, and then it'll crank. The other reason why it would not crank is the Infinity power step. If the power step here, that powers up and down, if that power switch there is on, if that power switch is on, the engine will not crank. So you have to make sure you have that back up in the closed position and the power of that power platform off. So I hope that helps, and safe boating. Talk to you soon. Thanks.